close your eyes for a moment. Not literally, not yet, but in your mind, try something. Try to remember the very first thing you ever experienced, your earliest memory. Maybe it's a face, a color, a sound. Maybe it's the warmth of being held, or the shock of cold air. Whatever it is, it sits there at the edge of your timeline like the first frame of a film. But here's what should haunt you. What was playing before that frame? Before your first breath, before your first cry, before your heart beat for the very first time inside your mother's womb. Where were you? Not your body. Your body we can trace. Science can walk you backward through cell division, fertilization, the meeting of genetic material. That story has a clear beginning. But something else. That feeling of being you, the awareness that is listening to these words right now, the observer behind your eyes, where was that before all of this began? This is not a new question. It may in fact be the oldest question ever asked, and the answers that humanity has offered across thousands of years, across every continent and every civilization, are so strange, so varied, and in some cases so eerily similar that they will change the way you think about your own existence. Today we're going on a journey. We're going to travel through ancient philosophy and modern neuroscience, through sacred texts and quantum physics, to the dreams of mystics and the data of researchers. And we're going to ask the question that no one has ever been able to fully answer, but that everyone at some point in the dark of night has whispered to themselves. Where was your soul before you were born? Let's begin where most great questions begin. In ancient Greece, in a small room with a man who was about to die. The year is 399 BC. Socrates has been sentenced to death. He's been found guilty of corrupting the youth of Athens and of impiety against the gods. In a few hours, he will drink a cup of hemlock and his heart will stop. And yet, according to his student Plato, Socrates is not afraid. In fact, he is calm, almost serene. And the reason for his calm is a belief so radical, so counterintuitive, that it would echo through the next 2,500 years of human thought. Socrates believed that the soul does not begin at birth. He believed that the soul already exists before the body is formed, that it has always existed, that it carries within it knowledge from before this life, knowledge of perfect forms, of truth, of beauty, of justice, and that the act of being born into a physical body is not a beginning at all. It is a forgetting. Plato captured this idea in several of his dialogues, but nowhere more powerfully than in the Meno and the Phaedo. In the Meno, Socrates demonstrates this by questioning an uneducated slave boy about geometry. Without being taught a single thing, the boy arrives at correct mathematical truths through questioning alone. Socrates' conclusion? The boy didn't learn these truths. He remembered them. They were already inside him, buried beneath the fog of birth, waiting to be uncovered. This is the theory of recollection, and its implications are staggering. Because if you can remember something you were never taught in this life, then you must have known it before this life. And if you knew something before this life, then you existed before this life. Think about that for a moment. Plato is not saying that your body existed before birth. He's saying that the essential you, the part that thinks, that wonders, that questions, that loves, was somewhere else before it ended up here. That your birth was not a creation. It was a transition. In the Phaedo, written as Socrates awaits execution, this idea reaches its most powerful expression. Socrates divides reality into two realms, the visible world, which is constantly changing and decaying, and the invisible world of forms, perfect, eternal, unchanging. The body belongs to the visible world. But the soul belongs to the invisible. It is more like the forms than like the body. And because the forms are eternal, the soul must be eternal too. It existed before the body was born. It will continue to exist after the body dies. Plato imagined the soul as something almost divine, a luminous knowing entity that once dwelled among the perfect forms, contemplating truth in its purest state. Then, through some cosmic process, it descended into the material world, was paired with the physical body, and in the trauma of that union forgot almost everything it once knew. Life then, is the process of remembering. Education is not the filling of an empty vessel. It is the rekindling of a flame that was always there. There is a breathtaking poem by William Wordsworth, written more than 2,000 years after Plato, that captures this idea with a beauty that philosophy alone cannot quite reach. It's from his ode, Intimations of Immortality, and it goes like this. Our birth is but a sleep and a forgetting, the soul that rises with us. Our life star hath had elsewhere its setting, and cometh from afar, not in entire forgetfulness, and not in utter nakedness, but trailing clouds of glory do we come from God, who is our home. Trailing clouds of glory do we come from God, who is our home. Trailing clouds of glory. As if the soul, arriving in this world, still carries wisps of whatever heaven it came from. As if there are residual traces of that other place clinging to us, fading slowly as we grow older and more embedded in the material world. Wordsworth believed that children, especially very young children, still have a connection to that pre-birth state, that the wonder and joy they experience in the world is not naivete, it is the afterglow of a more luminous existence. And here's where something remarkable happens, because this is not just a Western idea. This is not just Plato and Wordsworth. This idea that the soul exists before the body, that birth is a transition rather than a beginning, appears in civilization after civilization, tradition after tradition across the entire span of human history. Let's travel east, to India, to one of the oldest continuous spiritual traditions on earth. In Hindu philosophy, the concept of the soul is called Atman, and the Atman is not something that was created at any point in time. The Atman is eternal. It has no beginning and no end. It is, in the language of the Upanishads, unborn, eternal, ever-existing, and primeval. It does not die when the body dies, and it was not born when the body was born. The Bhagavad Gita, perhaps the most widely read scripture in Hinduism, puts it with stunning clarity. Lord Krishna speaks to the warrior Arjuna on the battlefield and says, "The soul is never born, nor does it ever die. It is not that having come into being it will cease to be. It is unborn, eternal, changeless, and ancient. It is not destroyed when the body is destroyed." In this framework, your soul is not something that appeared when you appeared. Your soul has always existed. It has passed through countless bodies, human, animal, perhaps even divine, in an unending cycle called samsara, the wheel of birth, death, and rebirth. Each life is a chapter. Each body is a garment. The soul puts on a new body, the way you might put on a new set of clothes, and when the clothes wear out, the soul discards them and moves on. But here's the truly profound part. The goal of all of this, the purpose behind the endless cycle, is not to keep going forever. The goal is moksha, liberation. The moment when the soul remembers its true nature, recognizes that it was never really separate from the universal consciousness, called Brahman, and dissolves back into the infinite from which it came. In this view, your soul was not merely somewhere before your birth. Your soul was everywhere. It was part of the fabric of existence itself. And the illusion, the great cosmic trick, is that you ever believed you were separate from it. Now consider Buddhism. The Buddha grew up steeped in Hindu philosophy, but he challenged it in a radical way. Buddhism teaches anatman, literally no self. There is no eternal, unchanging soul that passes from body to body. Instead, what continues from life to life is more like a flame passed from one candle to the next. The new flame is not the same flame, but it was caused by the old one. It carries its heat, its light, its energy. So in the Buddhist view, there is continuity without identity. Something persists. Something carries the karma, the accumulated weight of actions and intentions from one life to the next. But it is not a fixed eternal soul. It is a process, a flowing, a becoming. This is a subtle but important distinction, because the question, where was your soul before birth, assumes that there is a fixed you that was somewhere. Buddhism gently suggests that the question itself may be based on a misunderstanding, that the you think you are is itself a construction, a pattern of thought and sensation that constantly changes. Like a river that is never the same water twice, but is still, somehow, recognizably a river. And yet, even within this framework, there is an acknowledgement that something precedes this life. that the conditions of your birth, your tendencies, your temperament, your inexplicable attractions and aversions are not random. They are the echoes of something that came before. Now, let's turn to the Abrahamic traditions, because here the story takes a very different shape. In mainstream Christianity, the dominant view is that the soul does not pre-exist the body. Most Christian theology holds that God creates each soul at the moment of conception, or, in some interpretations, at birth. The soul has a beginning, even though it will have no end. It is created by God for a specific body at a specific time, but this was not always the unanimous view. In the early centuries of Christianity, one of the most brilliant and controversial thinkers in the history of the faith, a man named Origen of Alexandria, taught something very different. Origen, writing in the 2nd and 3rd centuries, proposed that all souls were created by God before the physical world existed. These souls in their original state were pure, luminous, and close to God. But through the exercise of free will, some souls turned away from the divine. They cooled in their devotion, and as they cooled, they fell, descending into the material world, where they were given physical bodies as a kind of remedial experience, a chance to learn, to grow, and eventually to return to God. This is breathtaking theology. It suggests that your life on earth is not your first chapter, that you chose in some primordial moment to turn away, and that this life, with all its suffering and beauty and confusion, is a school, a curriculum designed for your soul's education. But Origen's ideas were deemed too radical. In 5533 AD, at the Second Council of Constantinople, the pre-existence of souls was formally condemned. The Emperor Justinian pressured the Church to declare, "If anyone asserts the pre-existence of souls, and shall assert the monstrous restoration which follows from it, let him be anathema." And with that, the door was closed. At least officially, the idea went underground, but it never fully disappeared. It would resurface in the writings of mystics, in the Gnostic Gospels, in the whispered traditions of those who felt, deep in their bones, that they had been somewhere before. Islam offers yet another perspective, and it is one of the most vivid and striking in all of world religion. In Islamic tradition, there is a concept called alam al-ara, the realm of souls. According to this teaching, before any human being was born into the physical world, all souls existed together in a pre-physical realm. And in this realm, something extraordinary happened. God addressed every soul that would ever exist and asked them a single question, "Am I not your Lord?" And every soul answered, "Yes, we bear witness." This is drawn from the Quran, Surah Al-Araf, verse 172. And it is a passage that sends shivers down the spine of anyone who truly contemplates it, because it means that you, your soul, your essential self, once stood before God. You heard the divine voice. You responded. You made a covenant. And then you forgot. Your birth into this world was the forgetting. And your life, the struggles, the prayers, the search for meaning, is the slow, aching process of remembering what you once knew with absolute certainty, that you are not alone, that you came from somewhere sacred, and that you are being called back. There's a hadith, a saying attributed to the Prophet Muhammad that adds another layer to this. It says, souls are like conscripted soldiers. Those whom they recognize, they get along with. And those whom they do not recognize, they will not get along with. The implication is startling. The people you feel an instant connection with in this life, you may have known them before, in the realm of souls, before either of you had a body. Had you ever met someone and felt inexplicably that you already knew them? That there was a recognition beneath the surface, a warmth that had no logical explanation? Islamic tradition suggests that this is not imagination, it is memory, memory from before. Now, let's turn to one of the most haunting images in all of religious thought. In Jewish mysticism, in the tradition of Kabbalah, there exists a concept called the guf. The guf is the treasury of souls. It is described as a chamber in the highest heaven, situated near the throne of glory, where all the souls that will ever be born are stored. According to the Talmud, in the Garden of Eden there stands a tree of souls, which blossoms and produces new souls. These souls ripen and fall into the guf, where they are kept until the time comes for each one to be born. When the moment arrives, the angel Gabriel reaches into the treasury and draws out the first soul that comes to hand. That soul is then placed into a body and a new life begins. But here is the part of this tradition that is both beautiful and terrifying. The gulf is finite. There are a limited number of souls. And when the last soul has been drawn from the treasury, when the gulf is finally empty, that is when the end of the world will come. The Messiah will arrive. History will reach its conclusion. Think about the weight of that idea. Every birth is a countdown. Every new life brings the world one step closer to its end. The baby born in a hospital this morning is not just a new beginning. She is also a subtraction from a cosmic inventory. One fewer soul in the treasury, the clock ticking forward. And before she was born, she was there, in the gulf, waiting, alongside every soul that has ever lived and every soul that will ever live. A vast, shimmering gathering held in a celestial chamber beside the throne of God, waiting for the angel's hand. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking. These are beautiful stories. They are profound mythology. They are the kinds of narratives that human beings have always created to make sense of the incomprehensible mystery of existence. But are they true? Is there any evidence, any hard, measurable, scientific evidence that consciousness or identity or anything resembling a soul exists before birth? Let's look at the science. And I want to be very careful here because the science is genuinely fascinating, even if it doesn't give us the neat, conclusive answers we might want. The first area to consider is the work of Dr. Ian Stevenson and his successor, Dr. Jim Tucker, both of whom worked at the University of Virginia's Division of Perceptual Studies. For more than 50 years, beginning in the 1960s, Stevenson meticulously documented cases of young children, typically between the ages of 2 and 5, who spontaneously reported memories of previous lives. These were not vague, dream-like recollections. In many cases, the children provided specific names, places, and details about people they had never met and events they had never been exposed to. Stevenson investigated over 2,500 such cases across multiple countries and cultures, and in a significant number of them, the details the children reported were verified. They matched the lives of real people who had died, often violently, often shortly before the child was born. One of the most well-known cases, documented by Dr. Tucker, involves a boy named James Leininger, who from the age of 2 began having intense nightmares about a plane crash. He described being a pilot. He named the aircraft carrier the USS Natoma Bay. He named the type of plane a Corsair. He even named his previous identity, James Houston Jr., a pilot who was shot down during the Battle of Iwo Jima in 1945. The details were verified. James Houston Jr. was real. He served on the Natoma Bay. He flew a Corsair. He died exactly as the young boy described. Now, what do we make of this? Skeptics have offered explanations. Cryptomnesia, where information is absorbed unconsciously and later surfaces as apparent memory. Leading questions from parents who may have inadvertently coached the child. Confirmation bias in the research. These are legitimate concerns, but they don't easily account for every case, particularly those where the details are so specific and so obscure that no plausible route of exposure can be identified. Whether or not these cases prove reincarnation, and that is a much stronger claim than the data alone can support, they do raise a genuinely unsettling question. If a child can demonstrate knowledge of a life that ended before they were born, then something is being transmitted. Something is crossing the boundary between one life and the next. Whether you call that something a soul, or consciousness, or information, or karma, the phenomenon demands an explanation, and we don't have a satisfying one yet. Now let's go deeper into the science, into the territory where physics meets philosophy and where the nature of consciousness itself becomes the question. One of the most provocative theories in modern science is the Or theory, orchestrated objective reduction, proposed by the Nobel Prize-winning physicist Sir Roger Penrose and the anesthesiologist Stuart Hameroff. Their theory, first published in the mid-1990s and refined over the decades since, proposes that consciousness is not simply a product of neurons firing in the brain. Instead, they suggest that consciousness arises from quantum processes occurring in structures called microtubules, tiny protein tubes inside neurons. Here's why this matters for our question. In standard neuroscience, consciousness is treated as an emergent property of complex computation. Your brain is a biological computer. Consciousness is what happens when the computer runs a certain kind of program. In this view, consciousness begins when the brain is sufficiently developed, sometime during fetal development or perhaps at birth, and ends when the brain dies. There is no before, there is no after. But Penrose and Hameroff propose something radically different. They suggest that consciousness is connected to the fundamental structure of space-time itself, to the quantum level of reality. If this is true, then consciousness is not something that is generated by the brain. It is something that the brain accesses. The brain becomes a kind of antenna, tuning into a form of awareness that exists at the most basic level of the universe. And if consciousness exists at the quantum level, if it is woven into the fabric of space-time, then it doesn't begin when the brain begins, and it doesn't end when the brain ends. It was there before the brain formed, and it will be there after the brain dissolves. This is not mysticism. This is a theory proposed by one of the most respected mathematical physicists of the modern era. It is controversial. Many neuroscientists and physicists disagree with it, but it has not been refuted. And recent experimental work on quantum effects in biological systems, including evidence of quantum vibrations in microtubules, has provided at least some preliminary support for the idea that quantum processes play a role in brain function. Then there is biocentrism, a theory proposed by the stem cell biologist Robert Lanza. Biocentrism turns our usual understanding of reality on its head. Instead of consciousness being a product of the universe, a late arrival in a cosmic process that began with the Big Bang, Lanza argues that consciousness is primary, that the universe itself exists because consciousness exists. That space, time, and the material world are constructs of conscious observation. If Lanza is right, and his arguments draw on well-established principles of quantum mechanics, particularly the role of the observer in determining the state of quantum systems, then asking, where was your soul before birth, is like asking, where was your ocean before this wave? The wave is a temporary expression of something much larger. It rises, it crests, it falls, but the water was always there, and it always will be. In this view, your individual consciousness is a temporary focusing of a universal awareness. Before your birth, that awareness existed, diffused perhaps, or focused in some other way, but it did not spring from nothing. And at your death, it will not disappear into nothing. It will simply change form. Like water becoming vapor, becoming cloud, becoming rain, becoming river, becoming ocean. Now I want to take us somewhere unexpected. I want to talk about what the ancient Egyptians believed, because their vision of the soul was unlike anything we've discussed so far. And it adds a dimension to this mystery that most people have never considered. The Egyptians didn't believe in a soul. They believed in multiple souls. They divided the spiritual essence of a human being into at least 5 distinct parts: the Ka, the Ba, the Ayab, the Ren, and the Shatu. The Ka was the vital life force, the spark of living energy that distinguished a living body from a dead one. It was created at the moment of birth by the ram-headed god Num, who fashioned it on his potter's wheel alongside the physical body. The Ba was something closer to what we might call personality or identity, the unique spiritual fingerprint that made you, you. After death, the Ba could travel freely between the world of the living and the afterlife, but it always needed to return to the body, which is one reason the Egyptians were so obsessed with preservation of the physical form through mummification. The Ren was the true name, and as long as your name was spoken and remembered, part of your soul survived. The Shut was your shadow, a dark reflection of yourself that was always with you. And the Ayb was the heart, the seat of emotion, thought, and moral character, the part of you that would be weighed against the feather of Ma'at in the hall of judgment after death. What's fascinating here is not just the complexity of the Egyptian view, but the underlying assumption that the soul is not a single simple thing. It is a composite, a constellation of spiritual elements, each with its own origin, its own nature, and its own destiny. Some parts of you may have existed before birth. Others may have been created at the moment of birth. And still others may be formed through the living of your life, through your choices, your relationships, your name being carried in the mouths of those who love you. This is a very different answer to our question. Not your soul was in one place before birth, but different aspects of what makes you have different origins, and some of them may not have a single origin at all. Let's pause here and consider something that ties all of these traditions together. Because despite their enormous differences, despite the fact that Plato and the Buddha and the Quran and the Kabbalists and the Egyptians were separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years, there is a remarkable thread running through all of them. They all agree on one thing, that birth is not the beginning. They disagree about what came before. They disagree about whether the soul is eternal or created, singular or composite, bound for liberation or bound for judgment. But they all share this foundational intuition that when a human being enters the world, something is arriving, not something new, something returning, something that was somewhere else in some other state, before it took on flesh and bone and opened its eyes for the first time. Why? Why do so many unconnected traditions arrive at the same conclusion? One possibility is that they are all drawing on a universal human experience. Think about it. Every human being has the experience of waking up inside consciousness with no memory of how they got there. You don't remember being born. You don't remember the first months of your life. Your earliest memories are fragmentary, dreamlike, unreliable. And before those memories, nothing. A void. A blank. Not darkness, because darkness is something you experience. Not silence, because silence is something you hear. Just absence. And the human mind cannot tolerate absence. We are pattern seekers, storytellers. We need beginnings. And so, across every culture, we have crafted narratives to fill that void, to explain where we were before we were here, to give our existence a prologue that makes the story feel complete. That's one possibility. The skeptical possibility. That these traditions are not remembering something real. They are imagining something necessary. But there's another possibility, and it's one we shouldn't dismiss too quickly. Because the convergence of these traditions, the way they all independently point toward the same fundamental claim, could also be evidence that they are all, in their own imperfect way, pointing at something true, something that human beings have always sensed, even if they can't prove it, something that sits just beyond the reach of logic and measurement, but that makes itself felt in quiet moments, in the déjà vu that stops you in your tracks, in the inexplicable feeling that you've been somewhere before, in the instant recognition of a stranger's face, in the way certain pieces of music move you to tears for no reason you can name. What if these experiences are not glitches? What if they are signals? There's a thought experiment I want to leave you with. It's not from any tradition or any scientist. It's something I want you to try yourself. Imagine the moment just before your conception, not biologically. We know what happens biologically, but experientially. From the inside, what was it like to not exist? You can't do it, can you? You cannot imagine your own non-existence. You can imagine darkness. You can imagine emptiness. But you cannot imagine the absence of the one who is doing the imagining. The observer cannot observe its own absence. The eye cannot see its own blindness. And this is not just a quirk of psychology. It might be telling us something profound. Because if you truly cannot conceive of your own non-existence, if the very act of trying to imagine the time before your birth requires a you to do the imagining, then perhaps the idea of your absolute non-existence is, in some deep sense, incoherent. Perhaps the you that is trying to imagine not existing is the same you that has always existed in one form or another, reaching back not just to the moment of your birth, but to something before that, and before that, and before that. The philosopher Thomas Nagel once wrote that the fact that you are conscious at all, the fact that there is something it is like to be you, is the most astonishing fact in the universe. More astonishing than galaxies or black holes or the age of the cosmos, because all of those things could exist without anyone to witness them. But consciousness, your consciousness, introduces something into the universe that is unlike anything else. It introduces a point of view, a perspective, an inside. And the question of where that inside was before you were born, before the neurons fired, before the heartbeat, before the cells divided, may be the deepest question there is, deeper than the origin of the universe. Because the universe, for all its grandeur, is just the stage. You, the observer, the feeler, the wonderer are the audience. And the audience had to come from somewhere. So where was your soul before birth? I'm not going to pretend I have the answer. No one does. But I believe the question itself is one of the most important you will ever sit with. Because hidden inside it is a truth that every tradition, every philosopher, every physicist, and every dreamer has been circling for millennia. You are not an accident. You are not a random arrangement of atoms that briefly became aware of itself and will soon dissolve back into nothing. You are something more, something that every civilization that has ever existed has recognized, honored, and tried to understand. Maybe your soul was in Plato's realm of forms, contemplating perfect beauty. Maybe it was resting in the Gulf, the treasury of souls beside the throne of glory, waiting for Gabriel's hand. Maybe it was in the Alam al-Arwah, bearing witness before God. Maybe it was cycling through the wheel of samsara, burning off the karma of 1,000 previous lives. Maybe it was woven into the quantum fabric of space-time, a pattern of information waiting to be expressed. Or maybe, just maybe, it was something that none of these traditions has fully captured, because the truth of what you are is larger than any single story, any single metaphor, any single equation. What I do know is this: the fact that you are here now asking this question, the fact that you are capable of wondering about your own origin, is itself a kind of miracle. Atoms don't wonder about themselves. Galaxies don't ask where they came from, but you do. And that capacity for wonder, that restless yearning to know what you are and where you came from, may be the closest thing we have to an answer. Because maybe the soul isn't something you have. Maybe the soul is something you are. And maybe the question, where was it before birth, is really the question, where does the deepest part of me come from? And maybe the answer is, from the same place everything comes from the mystery at the heart of existence itself. The mystery that was there before the Big Bang, before the first star ignited, before the first cell divided, before the first breath was drawn. The mystery that is still here, right now, reading these words. Wondering. You have been wondering your entire life, but perhaps you have been wondering much, much longer than that. Thank you for staying with me on this journey. This is one of those questions that doesn't have a finish line. It has a horizon. And every step you take toward it reveals more ground you didn't know was there. If this moved you, if it made you think, if it made you feel something you can't quite name, hold on to that feeling. It might be more important than you realize. It might be the oldest thing about you.